aha moment when you realize that, you know what, he could have taught me a little bit more than what he taught me, and I could have been in a better place emotionally, psychologically for my my wife and my kids and things. What was your aha moment?
I think early on, my fourth grade teacher, he was fourth and fifth grade homeroom teacher, Mr. Chambers. Whenever we would enter his classroom or his presence, he would always greet us.
Hmm.
He'd say, "How you doing, Brother Roland?" And he would call people brother and people sister because back then we until this day you still people walking around we calling one another the N-word
Mm,
and we calling people out of their names, but
yeah,
he made sure that he addressed you a certain way and you addressed him a certain way.
yeah,
And then if you didn't, remember back then, this in the six in what 70s and early 80s, you could still get the paddle.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
even his paddles was like Brother Leroy.
yeah.
So he had to make you get your own.
Right.
But he established a standard of how men in his classroom behaved.
Yeah,
And I think that, and growing up, you start seeing patterns of other people
yeah,
that still develop you, and you like it because it's fast money, fast girls, and all these other things. So
yeah,
you allow that to develop you, and then when you grow up, you start saying, "Man, this is destructive." Because if I live like this, if I live like he lived, I have 18 baby mamas.
yeah,
I will
yeah,
have, all these things. And even after falling and doing certain things, you come across people in your lives. My former pastor, he was the one that I attached to because I saw how he treated his wife and how he treated his family.
yeah,
And that was where I gravitated towards him, and it allowed me to learn
yeah,
what it is to be a man, because he told me certain things that still stick with me. He said, if the kids can't learn, if the kids can't read because the lights are off, it's your fault.
mm,
But if the kids can't read because they don't know, it's her fault.
mm,
Because putting the onus and the responsibility, the onus was always on the man.
yeah,
Say whatever happens that goes on in your house is your fault.
yeah, yeah,
And that stuck with me, like, man, it's my fault, but she did this. And it led me to a place where I can't place the blame on anybody else.
right, right,
It's not my wife's job to, it's late at night, somebody knock on the door and go get the door, baby. Like, what? No, I'm the protector. I'm the
right,
protector.
right,
I'm the
right,
provider. Ain't no
right,
50-50 going on in my house.
right,
That's just my house. Some people, they move like that. That's fine. But I want it to be where I know that everything in my household is protected, and I can't leave that in anybody else's hands.
yeah. Man, I like it. I like it, and I love where you're going with this, right? Because for me, I don't know if I had one particular aha moment. I think for me, it was kind of like the culmination of multiple events to where I start mentally putting together. So I would see, a whole family, husband, wife, children together, and seeing that the husband was an active role in the children's life, and again, watching them interact. Friend of mine, watching them interact, and I'm watching that there are very fruitful conversations that are taking place to where the child runs to the father and not necessarily the mother. Not that running to the mother is a bad thing, right? But the child runs to the father because the father himself made it a safe space for that child to run to. I've seen where, and when I say child, I mean either or, man, boy child or girl child. And, just being able to see that, that family function, and then watching those kids grow up and seeing how they developed. Then, kind of like you, being around a certain pastor, and, that particular pastor is teaching certain things from a biblical perspective. And then I'm gaining some sort of awareness based upon my understanding of what I'm hearing. And it's not just what I'm hearing. Now I'm going home, I'm studying it, because at one particular point in time, I was sitting at home with like 3 different Bibles open. I had the King James Version, I had the NIV, and I had, you know what I'm saying? I'm going from one to one. I'm like, hold on, I need to see, I need to compare this. And as I'm comparing, I'm starting to see me in these lines, right? I'm not seeing anybody else but me because I want to fix me. And the issue for me is I got excited about what I was learning and I would share it. And when I would share it, it was almost shot down. And I was like, this is depressing. But by that same token, I have not lost my motivation in this direction because I understand that the Bible was written for me and the reader, for me. And so I don't want to take it and slap anybody else in the face with it. I want to read it, digest it, and implement it and let my behavior be significant. Well, that's kind of like the thing I looked at when it comes down to this idea of masculinity. It shouldn't be kind of like an imposing force within the four walls of my home.
Right.
It shouldn't be an imposing force within the community. Nobody should walk around me fearfully, right? There's a difference between fear and respect. Respect shouldn't incite fear, right? We can teach respect to such a degree that it does not challenge authority, but within the scope of the understanding of challenges, healthy conversation. We can still have a healthy conversation, right? But I just think it's that idea. So man, and then my third one was, just sitting down and talking to the older people in my family. I listen, like, I don't know what it is. I have a thing when it comes down to listening to older people because there's so much wisdom that come out of their mouth. I would just sit and listen to my mother talk all day about nothing. But she could be talking about nothing, but she's going to drop some knowledge,
right,
in that conversation. And I'm here to soak it up, all of it, because she has way more experience than I have and a far better understanding of certain things that I've never encountered. And what I enjoy doing is being able to view the world through her lens, because her generation experienced things differently than my generation. And one of the things I was sharing with Bishop Majors is that how the things that she taught me came to bear in the sands of Iraq. Brother, I appreciate those survival skills. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So, it's just those things. So all of those things packaged in the bottle, it kind of helped me to understand something. But here's the funny part about it. Even within the scope of that understanding, it still was kind of like a journey to kind of get rid of that toxicity that exists within the scope of my understanding what father. I'm the man of the house. Well, that's toxic. That's toxic.
Yeah.
And here's what I'm saying. I don't want anybody to misunderstand what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with being the man of the house because I'm the only man in the house. But I don't need to beat the table to remind people that I'm the man in the house. Hey, I'm the only man in the house. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
What we have to do is move to that place to where we can have healthy conversation so that ideally both of us are on the same page. And go ahead, man. Go ahead.
With you saying that, I think there's a difference between being a male and being a man.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of us are men, but you're just grown boys.
Yeah.
A lot are just grown boys. You're male because you have male genitalia. And it doesn't matter whether you are the most, as we consider, masculine, macho person in the world, or whether you have a softer side to you. Because people, we think softer people aren't men, they aren't manly. And that's because we were grown that way, not realizing that when we were coming up, we grew up under, because we about the same age.
Yeah.
And we grew up under what we were a glorified pimp culture.
Okay, all right.
And
I got you.
We don't realize until we look at it in hindsight that those people that were pimps, that were using women, they were effeminate. They had nails. They wore the fashion trends, and they talked softly. And baby, we all talk about Goldie and stuff like that. And they were effeminate, and that way they could speak to women in a way that would lead them astray. And but we thought it was a masculine thing to do, a masculine way to be. And then if he was an aggressive person, they called him a gorilla pimp.
Right.
And nowadays we have a lot of guys that are grown in age, they are male, but they aren't men because they don't accept responsibility for their actions. They don't accept responsibility for what goes on around them in their community. And that's what I think, that's where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to make
Yeah.
sure that the people that are around me and myself, I want to accept responsibility, one, for myself and my actions,
Right. Right.
two,
Right.
for what happens in my community and within the people in my community. And then I can call myself a man,
Yeah.
because it's not just about me beating my chest, being, oh, I'm gonna whoop the baddest person on the block.
Right.
No,
Right.
it's
Right.
not about that. It's
Yeah.
about making sure we all can get ahead.
Yeah, man, I love it. I love it. And what I like about what you're saying is that you are taking responsibility. It's one thing to have a conversation. It's one thing to have a conversation through the lens of your experience. And I think this is like, and again, it kind of takes me back to, me studying the Bible. Me studying the Bible was all about me trying to become better so that I can be better and do better. And I think that's really what we're talking about. So when we start looking at these masculine ideas, this male machismo, this kind of, it's really, it becomes comical when you see it on TV, right? But it becomes less of a comedy thing when you see it in person. Do as I say, and, don't worry about this and don't worry about that and things of that nature. It's not that you have to go into great details to explain this or explain that, but there has to be a degree of awareness that exists. That's part of that teaching culture, right? If let's be honest, when we go back to what the Bible says, it tells us not to, provoke the children to anger, but raise them up in a way. Well, guess what? That scripture was devoted to the Father. In that particular scripture, he was talking directly to the Father. So when we understand that a father, one of his primary responsibilities in the house is to teach.
Right.
And if he is not teaching it, and let's be clear when we talk about the word teach, it's not just sit down classes in session. No, it's watch me. And when we go back and research it, one of the things that we understand about discipleship is that disciples live with their rabbi.
Right.
So it wasn't just the lesson that was being taught, it was the lesson that was being modeled, which is the strongest form of any lesson that we want to teach. And what we don't realize is the lessons that most kids are learning from their parents are the ones that they're observing in their behavior. And that's where we're getting at. A lot of these lessons were never understood that they were being taught. It was like, hey, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna go do this. And when I go out in the street, I'm just gonna do whatever it is I'm gonna do, and I'll come home when I get ready to, and you ain't gonna say nothing to me because I'm the man. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. We have to take responsibility, like you said, Roland. We have to take responsibility for our behaviors. We have to take responsibility for our actions. And within the scope of both of those things, we take responsibility for the well-being and the health of our family. Like, how do you understand the effects to manifest itself in the environment?
I think we can see the effects in our families. It's continued single parent homes. We have where our girls are flourishing, but yet our boys, we happy if they graduate high school. And they can, the effects damage the family structure, which damages the communities. And once the family structure is damaged, everything in your community goes down. Yeah. Crime goes up. Why? Because no one has anybody. You need somebody to, snatch you up sometime.
Yeah.
Not in the violent way, but somebody has to get your attention to let you know that this is not how we move.
Right.
And I think, like you were saying, how you read the Bible, but then the people are like, and that's how I was. I would read the Bible, preach the Bible, teach the Bible. But my living when I got home didn't exemplify what I just read.
Yeah.
And so when one of those effects was, I didn't know how to love my children right. I didn't know how to love my wife right. I didn't know how to love myself right. Because the things that, if I damage my household, anything in my household, I'm damaging myself. And then, but the society will tell you, well, you can get another one. Well, just hey, because my father, he taught me some crazy sayings, but when it came to women, he said, boy, you can catch another one before you can catch a cold.
Wow.
It's like, okay, but then this is my wife, so you ought to be telling me something to to build this up, to make
Yeah.
sure that I don't damage her, because we have a lot of damaged children, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of damaged former girlfriends, spouses, and whatever, because of how we led them with our words, but our behaviors didn't follow suit.
Absolutely, man. I love it. I love it. Yeah, and man, you said so many good things just now. Damaged children grow up to be damaged adults.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of like one of the things that we need to understand. When we see toxic masculinity today coming out of an adult male, it's only because that young man has been damaged when he was younger. Let's be honest. And I don't want to use the term damage to such a degree that we're talking about an appliance or something of that nature. But let's just be honest. There were some unhealthy traits that he learned growing up. And so those unhealthy traits manifested at a certain particular point. Here's the thing for me that really resonates, because I think you mentioned it a couple of times, and I really want to go back to it. There is a thing called personal responsibility, but what I don't get the right to do is come to Roland and say, "Hey, you need to take responsibility for that." Doesn't work. That doesn't work. If we're going to talk personal responsibility again, that's for me. That's the only conversation I can have with me. That's a personal responsibility. That's something I need to have a conversation with me. When it comes down to Roland, the conversation needs to be, "Hey man, how can I help you with this?" That's where we start erasing these things, because the effects, as you mentioned, man, is just, oh man, it's unsurmountable. And I like what you said. To go along with it, I think I've seen something previously. I think it was by the Pope or whatever. And it said that the family is the foundation of the community, which goes back to what you're saying. If the family is the foundation of the community, then we need to understand that the father, that, and again, not disrespecting any mothers, just want to make sure I'm saying this, but the father, in concert with the mother, in essence, is the ones who help to build a healthy community through the way that they interact healthily with their own family. Whenever those two aren't getting together, whenever they can't figure out how to become one, now we're having a problem. And any form of toxicity that is experienced in that relationship will never lead to those two coming together and bonding in such a way that we can be healthy teachers to our children. So I want to make sure I say that, because I think you're absolutely right. Those effects, and I want to add to what you're saying as well, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're a very wise guy. A little older than me, by the way. I want to make sure I go back and say that. You got me by a couple of years. Listen, I don't think you understand. Everybody who comes on the show is older than me. I just want you to understand that. That's just the facts. That's just the way it is. Toxic masculinity at its finest, baby. No, I'm joking. No, but seriously. I want to make sure I go back and address this, because I believe when it comes down to, the family, and it doesn't take away the potential of any relationship, but we train in the same sex, and then there's a special relationship in the opposite sex. So we nurture that way. So we train the same sex and we nurture the opposite sex. So mothers generally nurture their boys and fathers generally nurture their girls. Mothers train their daughters and fathers train the son. Now, it doesn't take away from anyone, because what we now understand within the scope of that type of relationship, there is a very necessary need for every person. One parent, even though they're capable of raising a child, that child is going to be missing something without the other parent. I think that's important to say at this point, because when we look at toxic masculinity and what it can actually do to the relationship between the husband and the wife, or the mother and the father, it can literally create a huge divide between the two of them. Well, once that divide exists, the child is the one that's going to suffer. From my experience, and you can kind of help me out and tell me if I'm in left field waiting on the blunt, but from my experience, when you have that happen in a relationship, it almost seems like the child has to go in the closet and hide if they want to talk to the non-custodial parent and things of that nature.
That is definitely true. And you also have where, because being us people of color, of African descent, however you want to label it, we come from under generations of people who had PTSD from slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and so forth.
Hmm.
So when they taught us certain things, it was out of a necessity to live.
Hmm.
And then you would have the mothers would grab hold to the boys, because I think that I've had just as many toxic traits taught by women as there were men, because there were women telling me, oh, he gonna be a cute baby maker, oh, he gonna be a ladies man, oh, and all that stuff sticks in
Yeah.
your psyche. So
Yeah.
when you grow up, you think more, not as I need a wife, or I need women, I
Right.
need to do
Right.
this. And so
Right.
you start treating these women like they need you, instead of they
Mm.
need you to mold them into the women and family members that they should be.
That's good. I like that. I like that. And you know what? I agree with you 100%, man. You know, it's survival is a thing, and survival is necessary for obvious reasons. But we can't stay stuck in survival for the rest of our lives. We have to
Mhm.
get to the point that we're flourishing. And once we get to the point that we can flourish, we can actually be healthy for other people. That's when you start moving into those character traits that are closely aligned with being the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. And I agree with you 100%. I just, again, when it comes down to those children, right? Just because me and the relationship between me and her didn't work out, or her and him didn't work out, that's okay. That child still needs you,
Right.
and that's the thing that we have to put at the forefront of everything else. And it's the difference between the story that people tell and the reality of the situation. I want to make sure I address that as well. I'm not going to go into detail. That's for another day. However, there's a difference between the story that people tell and the reality of the situation. That's toxic as well. When we talk specifically about toxic masculinity, when we shape the story to create us as the hero, that is toxic, because what you're doing now is you're poisoning the minds of those people who hear it. And then what ends up happening is that they create this narrative about this particular person. And unfortunately, that particular person in some cases can be the man. So what we have to understand is that toxicity exists. It just exists. And anything that doesn't allow us to get to the point to where, we're thriving and being the best version of ourselves so that we can help each other, it's not good. But specifically about toxic masculinity, I cannot use my manliness, to kind of make people dance to my music per se, because
Right.
when I do that, what ends up happening is that I create the narrative in a child's mind, especially a boy child, that that's okay to do when he becomes a man. In a girl child, it's okay to be in that when she becomes a woman. And unfortunately, in some cases, we're creating, and it's worse for the female. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I'm saying that for this reason only, because they will accept abusive relationships.
Yes.
That's why I'm saying it. So we have to be super careful as men not to push our toxicity on our children, because it can have a very long, profound psychological and emotional effect in the long run.
You seen it in the army. Some people, you seen it, where people do all this barking, like, and me and you, we were never barkers. We could get our point across, not going here, but they understood what we were saying.
I did used to get loud. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you used to get loud, but it wasn't the norm for you just to be out there barking.
No, it wasn't the norm.
Because, and for me to get out there barking, I'm like, well, I'm gonna raise my blood pressure.
There you go.
Like, because either way, you gonna do what I said you had to do anyway. But that's another trait where I can be toxic and not loud.
Yeah.
Just because I'm not yelling
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I'm not being toxic, because I can say some things sarcastic. I can say some things to make sure I can hit a little sore spot with you.
Yeah.
And when we have to, when what we're saying or doing, we know it's gonna have a damaging effect on the person,
Yes.
it's toxic in nature.
Yes.
Period. If it's not to build you up, it's to tear you down.
Absolutely.
And I think sometimes we have to hold ourselves accountable and even apologize. Like I was telling you earlier, that I had to go back and apologize to my children because of how the example of a father I was, because I told them I'm a better grandfather now than I was as a father because I wasn't there. My mind, I was thinking about self.
Yeah.
I was thinking about self and the next whatever and moving on. And I had to apologize to them. And I try to navigate and have conversations with them now
Yeah.
so that they won't fall into the same pitfalls that I had along their journey.
Yeah. You know, when you said that earlier, man, it just, man, I think I don't know, man. I think if it was possible, like you blew some strands off of my beard when you said that. Like that was such a profound statement. And then I really sat and I thought into it. Because I mean, a statement like that really makes you take a look at yourself. And I think every man, and again, just talking about man, not that, you know, women are excluded from this, but I think every man, when they really take a look at self and they look at their behavior as a grandfather, I think they can say that because ultimately, hopefully, they've learned from all of the mistakes that they've made when they were a father, and when it comes down to that grandchild, they just want to do right by that grandchild. Now, I'm not saying that this is 100% across the board, but I'm hoping that this is the case because I really thought into it, and I mean, man, that was such a good statement. I mean, if I had recorded that and could play it right now, I think I said "wow" like 4 times after you said it. Because it just made me think. Go ahead.
Right. And earlier, the tears was crying. No, I'm just kidding. Nah.
Be putting me out in the street. Let me tell you something. Talking about toxic masculinity, I'll be honest with you. I have gotten to the point that I do not mind crying. I will cry in a heartbeat. But like you mentioned earlier, that was one of the things that we suffered from. Like, boys don't cry. And so with that being said, we thought it was a bad thing to display emotions. Well, we don't necessarily understand the effect that has on the people around us. Right. And I'll be honest with you, that's one of the things my ex-wife, she got mad at me about years ago. She like, you don't display emotions. I'm like, I don't know what you mean. I'm a grown man and I was totally lost. And when she said that, it took me some time to consider it and think into it. And she was right. I had a hard time expressing myself is what she was really saying.
Right.
And it wasn't that I didn't want to. I don't think I knew how to.
Exactly.
And that's the key. And I think the problem is we don't say that then. We just take the criticism. And the thing that you don't share with people, they're totally unaware of. And see, back then, if I had shared with her, I didn't know how to express myself because it was never like, I never seen men express themselves like that. I mean, it's kind of like what I witnessed growing up. Men was tough. That's it. They worked hard. They came home. They ate. They took a shower. They ate. Watched TV until they passed out. And they went next day. They went back did the same thing.
Right.
Didn't see a whole lot of the other stuff. Didn't see a whole lot of getting down there playing with the kids and all that great stuff. And granted, it's probably because of the time frame, because it wasn't a whole lot of little kids in the house when I was growing up. But as men, we should not be afraid to express ourselves. And here's the key. We don't really have problems, I believe, expressing ourselves to our daughters. I think we do that inherently. And I would say it like this. We do it more so to the daughter than to the son. Probably not to the level that we should, but I think our sons suffer, right? Because we can't express that. Like, I'll be the first one to say that was one of my things. Like, I didn't hear that from my father until I became an adult, to be honest with you. No shade or nothing of that nature. It was just probably not something that was modeled for him. And so we, especially as fathers, we got to get to the point to where we learn to express our emotions to such a degree that we are transparent about